hemisphere trembles under a single unsettling question. What happens when a man hunted for years by his own people becomes the target of the world's most capable intelligence alliance? The crisis unfolding in Venezuela no longer resembles an isolated authoritarian struggle. It feels like the opening scene of a geopolitical thriller, one where the boundaries of power secrecy and military resolve collide in real time. As the sun sets over Caracas, a sense of quiet dread hangs in the air. Troop movements appear on satellite feeds. Signals intercepts pulse through encrypted networks. And from Washington to Tel Aviv, analysts watch a map that grows brighter with every new indicator of Venezuelan instability. In 2025, President Donald Trump has recalibrated Washington's approach to the Western Hemisphere, treating instability in Latin America as both a domestic security threat and a test of American global influence. The collapse of conventional diplomacy with Nicolás Maduro has not been followed by the usual stalemate. Instead, it has given rise to something unprecedented, the merging of American and Israeli covert power into a single high-precision machine designed to locate, isolate, and neutralize the Venezuelan leader. Reports circulating through U.S. agencies describe this moment as a strategic hinge, a point where the region's future may pivot dramatically. The shock intensifies with the revelation first whispered in intelligence circles, then echoed by international media that the Mossad, Israel's feared intelligence agency, is operating quietly across Venezuela. Long known for dismantling terror networks, infiltrating hostile regimes, and executing missions with surgical stealth, the agency now applies its expertise to tracking Maduro's inner circle. The presence of the Mossad instantly transforms the battlefield. Their methods are subtle, persistent, and almost always invisible until the mission is already complete. For decades, South America seemed too distant from the fault lines of global conflict to become a major arena for intelligence warfare. That assumption has evaporated. Every new piece of evidence suggests the hemisphere has entered a new era, one where superpower rivalry extends into the jungles, coastlines, and border cities of Venezuela. As the United States strengthens regional alliances with Guyana, Argentina, and Trinidad and Tobago, new logistics routes, radar networks, and naval patrol zones take shape, tightening the pressure on the Maduro regime. Inside Venezuela, the atmosphere is suffocating. Military officers whisper that the regime is running out of room to maneuver. High-ranking officials report unexplained surveillance patterns, intercepted communications, and strange disappearances of mid-level commanders. The knowledge that the Mossad is involved generates fear far beyond the reach of U.S. intelligence alone. Venezuelan insiders know the agency's reputation. They do not chase targets, they dismantle their environments. Every route out of the country, every safe house, every trusted ally now feels compromised. Meanwhile, Washington interprets this moment as a demonstration of American resolve after years of perceived strategic drift. The U.S. sees the Venezuela operation not only as a security imperative, but as a test of whether its prestige remains intact in a world increasingly contested by China and Russia. What begins as a regional crisis becomes a symbol of global credibility. If the United States cannot enforce stability in its own hemisphere, where can it? The stage is set, the pressure is rising, and the hemisphere waits, knowing the next move could reshape the balance of power across the Americas. The quiet arrival of Mossad teams in the Venezuelan theater marks a turning point, though almost nothing about their presence is ever officially acknowledged. Their methods are as much psychological as operational. Maduro's inner circle understands that once Mossad becomes involved, the margin for error shrinks to almost nothing. The agency has spent decades mastering the art of moving unseen through cities, jungles, diplomatic corridors, and digital shadows. And now that expertise is being recalibrated for a new target, the weakening fortress of Chavismo. Unlike traditional intelligence footprints, Mossad's presence does not manifest as battalions, bases, or aerial patrols. It appears in subtler forms, unusual electronic signatures near military compounds, unexplained gaps in encrypted communications drones that locals mistake for birds, and behavioral anomalies across the networks that sustain Maduro's personal security. The agency's priority is not confrontation, but clarity mapping every vulnerability in a regime already strained by economic collapse, internal mistrust, and fractured alliances. Their entry builds on groundwork already laid by the CIA, but Mossad brings something different, a proven doctrine of infiltration honed in the Middle East, where intelligence failures carry existential consequences. As noted by analysts and echoed in emerging reports, the agency specializes in identifying escape routes, dismantling protective networks, and tracking high-level targets even in dense urban terrain. Maduro and his loyalists suddenly find themselves facing a type of surveillance they are not trained to evade. The tools Mossad deploys, some openly known, others whispered about in intelligence communities, represent the apex of modern clandestine warfare. Teams rely on long-range cameras disguised as infrastructure components, sensor arrays buried in soil near key roads, AI-driven intercept systems, and drones capable of extended loiter time over suspected hideouts. These devices are not used to strike, but to observe, to understand who enters a facility, who leaves what they carry, and how their patterns change as the pressure mounts. For Israel, the operation is not merely an extension of US strategy, it is also an opportunity to reinforce its role as a decisive intelligence partner at a moment when the global security environment is shifting, with relative calm returning to parts of the Middle East following prisoner exchanges and negotiated pauses. Resources can be repositioned to support American goals abroad. The decision to project intelligence power into Latin America signals both capability and confidence. Back in Washington, the integration of Mossad's findings restructures the entire operational picture. New escape corridors emerge on 3D maps. Previously unknown safe houses appear linked to international networks. The regime's intercommunications reveal gaps that no longer make strategic sense. Every layer of secrecy Maduro once relied on begins thinning at the edges. This silent entry also accelerates psychological decay within the regime. Commanders fear that any meeting could be monitored, any convoy could be tagged, and any loyalist could already be compromised. Some begin limiting travel, others avoid digital communication entirely. A few, sensing the tightening noose, quietly explore possibilities for defection. The stage is no longer defined by visible displays of military power in the Caribbean. It is defined by invisible warfare, by the quiet, methodical dismantling of a regime's ability to hide. As weeks pass, the hunt for Nicolás Maduro evolves from a distant strategic objective into an increasingly precise operation. The coordination between the CIA and Mossad forms a seamless intelligence architecture, one that leaves fewer and fewer shadows for the embattled Venezuelan leader to hide in. What began as discreet monitoring has matured into a near-total net, stretching from the Caribbean coastline to the dense jungles of Apure, and from underground smuggling tunnels to the secret airstrips used by the regime's most trusted couriers. Inside the Pentagon and Tel Aviv, live operations rooms monitor the country around the clock. Satellite imagery updates every few minutes. Irregular troop movements trigger instant alerts. Even routine transactions fuel shipments. Encrypted calls, passport scans are flagged when they deviate from their usual cadence. The goal is not only to locate Maduro, but to collapse the network that protects him. According to analysis circulating through intelligence briefings, Mossad is mapping escape routes and identifying weak links within the presidential guard, while the CIA handles wide-spectrum intercepts and regional logistics planning. The regime feels the shift almost immediately. Senior officials report unusual drone sightings. Convoys change routes in panic. Loyalist commanders begin rotating their own security teams, unsure whether the threat lies outside the palace walls or within them. For years, Maduro relied on Cuban intelligence advisors to shield him from foreign penetration, but the sophistication of the current operation surpasses anything Havana had prepared them for. The alliance between Washington and Tel Aviv has created a multi-layered trap, digital, human, logistical, and psychological. One of the most critical breakthroughs comes from identifying Maduro's redundant corridors, paths he could use to flee if the state collapses. Mossad analysts, drawing on decades of experience tracking fugitives through hostile terrain, narrow down likely escape vectors by examining terrain bottlenecks, historic smuggling routes, and shifts in elite military deployments. Meanwhile, CIA field assets monitor border zones in Colombia and Brazil, where sympathetic governors and clandestine financiers once offered sanctuary to Chavista elites. Every route begins to close. This tightening hunt sparks fractures within the regime itself. Some high-ranking officers quietly reach out to foreign embassies, seeking guarantees of protection. Others retreat from public appearances, fearing targeted operations. Mossad's reputation amplifies these fears within intelligence circles. The agency is known for striking without warning, using precision tools and methods that leave little room for retaliation. The uploaded report highlights how even the mention of Mossad involvement induces fear across Chavista ranks, eroding morale and accelerating desertions. Meanwhile, the CIA leverages its vast signals network to expose internal betrayals. Secure lines once trusted by ministers suddenly go dark. Memos leak. Even Maduro's closest advisors suspect each other of cooperating with foreign agencies. Every paranoid whisper reveals that the hunt is not only physical, but psychological. The more Maduro tries to tighten his circle, the smaller and more suspicious it becomes. Outside Venezuela, allied governments in the region begin preparing for multiple contingencies. Argentina and Guyana quietly enhance intelligence sharing agreements with Washington. Naval patrols in the Caribbean increase, designed to intercept any irregular aircraft or vessels attempting to flee Venezuelan waters. Regional leaders understand that a cornered autocrat can act irrationally, and the operational footprint now surrounding the country reflects a sense of urgency unprecedented in recent Latin American history. By the time the hunt reaches full tempo, Maduro no longer controls the pace of events. The initiative belongs to the unseen operators watching him from the sky, the sea, and the very networks he once believed would protect him. The circle tightens, the options shrink, and the moment of confrontation draws closer with every intercepted signal. The tightening noose around Venezuela does not exist in isolation. To global strategists watching from Washington, Brussels, and Jerusalem, the unfolding crisis echoes familiar patterns seen across other major flashpoints of the 21st century. The intelligence buildup, the covert alliances, the struggle between authoritarian resilience and democratic pressure, these elements resonate with conflicts stretching from Eastern Europe to the Middle East and the Pacific. And as the United States and Mossad deepen their operations against Maduro, analysts warn that the Venezuelan theater may represent not merely a regional crackdown, but a reflection of a broader shift in global power dynamics. The first parallel emerges in Ukraine, where years of grinding warfare have demonstrated how modern conflict increasingly relies on precision intelligence, satellite coordination, and joint operational frameworks. The same tools used to track Russian troop movements in Donbass now illuminate Maduro's escape corridors. The same real-time drone feeds that helped Ukraine blunt armored assaults now monitor Venezuelan military convoys weaving through the Andes. And the same global scrutiny applied to Moscow's disinformation campaigns now examines the narratives emerging from Caracas as the regime fights to mask internal fracture. The pattern is unmistakable. The line between warfighting and intelligence warfare continues to blur. Another echo surfaces in the long-standing tensions between Israel and Iran. Mossad's involvement in Venezuela is not just a gesture of support for U.S. strategy, it is an expansion of an operational doctrine built across decades of high-stakes confrontation. The agency's methods in dismantling Iranian nuclear networks, neutralizing clandestine operatives, and sabotaging hidden infrastructure resonate in the tactics currently deployed in South America. Intelligence officials note striking similarities, the emphasis on covert penetration rather than open conflict, the reliance on technology that silently tracks suspects for months, and the strategic aim of collapsing a regime's internal confidence before a single shot is fired. As the uploaded report highlights, Mossad's reallocation of resources after the easing of immediate Middle Eastern tensions has opened a window for deeper involvement in global operations, including the hunt for Maduro. Farther east, the situation in Venezuela parallels rising friction between the United States and China. Beijing's growing defense of authoritarian partners has transformed local crises into global contests. In Latin America, China sees economic opportunity and strategic leverage. In Washington, this is interpreted as encroachment into a region historically under U.S. influence. The Venezuelan crisis therefore becomes a test. Can the United States still shape outcomes in its own hemisphere, or has the global balance shifted toward multipolar fragmentation? Intelligence cooperation with Israel reinforces this question, underscoring Washington's determination to reaffirm leadership at a moment when Beijing is expanding diplomatic, financial, and military partnerships across the global south. These parallels illustrate a profound truth: Venezuela is not simply a failing state under authoritarian rule. It is a microcosm of the geopolitical turbulence defining the 2020s. The methods, alliances, and doctrines being tested here will influence strategies used in future confrontations from Eastern Europe to the South China Sea. And while the tools of war evolve, the underlying struggle remains constant: the clash between regimes seeking survival at any cost and global powers determined to enforce accountability, stability, and influence. This is why the crisis attracts such intense international attention. What happens on the streets of Caracas may ultimately shape decisions made in Kiev, Tehran, Taipei, and Washington. The world watches because the lines connecting these conflicts continue to tighten, forming a web of interdependence that no nation can afford to ignore. As the intelligence noose tightens around Nicolás Maduro, the most visible consequences unfold not in war rooms or diplomatic halls, but in the daily lives of millions of Venezuelans. The country has lived through economic collapse, mass migration, and political repression, yet the current atmosphere feels different, charged, uncertain, and increasingly volatile. Psychological pressure radiates outward from the regime's inner circle and settles over every neighborhood checkpoint and border crossing. When whispers replace certainty and fear replaces routine ordinary citizens become the first casualties of an invisible war. In Caracas, rumors swirl faster than official statements. Some say elite units have abandoned their posts. Others claim foreign operatives roam the capital disguised as aid workers. None of these stories are confirmed, but in an environment shaped by secrecy and surveillance, perception becomes reality. Store owners close early, unsure whether unrest will erupt overnight. Families avoid discussing politics in public. Even long-standing supporters of the government begin questioning whether the state can still guarantee their safety. Reports describing the involvement of Mossad amplify this psychological shock-feeding speculation that the regime is now exposed to forces far beyond its control. Inside the military, the tension is even sharper. Officers responsible for Maduro's personal protection operate under suffocating suspicion. Every movement is monitored, every conversation scrutinized. Soldiers who once pledged loyalty now find themselves calculating risks, remain tied to a weakening regime, or quietly distance themselves before consequences arrive. As Mossad and the CIA unravel escape routes and communication channels, the sense of inevitability grows. The uploaded report notes that merely mentioning Mossad involvement generates fear among regime loyalists, causing some to desert rather than face an unknown adversary with a reputation for overwhelming precision. These fractures extend to the borders where thousands of migrants cross daily into Colombia, Brazil, or the Caribbean. Many flee because of economic desperation, but others leave out of fear that a major confrontation is approaching. Border towns have become pressure valves, places where intelligence services, smugglers, refugees, and deserting soldiers mingle in uneasy proximity. Colombian and Brazilian officials quietly boost security, aware that political instability in Venezuela spills over instantly into their own territory. Regional neighbors feel the shockwave as well. Guyana, already in a tense territorial dispute with Caracas, strengthens cooperation with U.S. Southern Command. Trinidad and Tobago enhances coastal patrols. Even distant nations such as Argentina adjust their diplomatic posture, signaling readiness to support collective regional responses. These actions reflect a growing recognition Venezuela is no longer just a domestic crisis. It is a destabilizing force capable of reshaping political currents throughout Latin America. Yet amid the geopolitical machinations, it is the human cost that reveals the crisis most starkly. Families divided by migration wonder whether they will ever reunite. Young soldiers, barely adults, are thrust into a contest between global intelligence powers. Civilians navigate daily shortages while absorbing the psychological burden of potential regime collapse. And throughout the country, a silent calculation plays out who will survive the next phase, and who will be caught between forces they neither chose nor understand. The human shockwave grows in intensity with every new intelligence operation, and as fear spreads, so does the realization that Venezuela stands on the threshold of irreversible transformation. The confrontation tightening around Venezuela has reached a moment of profound consequence not only for Caracas but for the entire Western Hemisphere. What began as a covert intelligence operation has grown into a test of regional stability, global security norms, and America's ability to shape outcomes in a rapidly changing world. Every decision made in Washington, Bogota, Brasilia, and Tel Aviv now carries implications far beyond Venezuela's borders. And as the pressure builds, Latin America stands at a crossroads that will define its political landscape for years to come. The United States views this moment as pivotal. After years of geopolitical uncertainty, divisions at home, and rising challenges abroad, President Donald Trump frames the Venezuela crisis as a measure of American strength. Success would reinforce Washington's claim to leadership in its hemisphere and demonstrate that authoritarian regimes aligned with U.S. adversaries cannot rely on impunity. Failure, however, would send a different message that great power contests now extend into regions once considered strategically settled. The stakes are no longer symbolic, they are structural. Israel's involvement adds a second layer of significance. Mossad's participation, as referenced in the uploaded report, signals that the crisis is not merely a regional dispute, but part of a broader international alignment against authoritarian influence and destabilizing networks. Israel brings not only intelligence skill, but global credibility in countering covert threats. Its partnership with the U.S. projects an image of unity at a time when shifting alliances elsewhere challenge Western cohesion. Meanwhile, authoritarian leaders across Latin America watch with unease. The uploaded text highlights that Washington's strategy extends beyond Maduro, targeting a wider constellation of leaders accused of corruption, repression, or support for anti-democratic blocs. Brazil's government, already criticized for its protection of politically tainted figures, interprets the Venezuela operation as a warning. Nicaragua, Cuba, and Bolivia strengthen internal counterintelligence measures. The message is unmistakable: the era of uncontested authoritarian expansion in the Americas may be ending. But geopolitical recalibration is only part of the story. The hemisphere is being pulled toward a deeper question, one that transcends government structures and intelligence operations. What kind of region will Latin America become? A place where democratic norms withstand foreign manipulation and internal decay, or a battleground where global powers vie for influence, using weakened institutions as footholds in a broader confrontation? The answer depends heavily on how the Venezuelan crisis concludes. A peaceful transition could stabilize migration flows, revive regional confidence, and break the momentum of authoritarian alliances. A violent collapse could fuel extremism, empower criminal networks, and create power vacuums reminiscent of other global conflicts. And if Maduro escapes, despite the tightening US Mossad operation, it may signal that decisiveness alone is not enough to secure strategic outcomes in an era defined by complexity and competing global interests. Across the hemisphere, civilians sense that the ground beneath them is shifting. Governments prepare contingency plans. Intelligence agencies remain on high alert, and the international community braces for a decisive moment that could arrive without warning. The crossroads is here. The world watches. And as Venezuela approaches a final reckoning, one question looms larger than all others. What future will emerge from this crucible, and who will shape the next chapter of power in the Americas? The operation unfolding in Venezuela represents one of the most significant intelligence-driven confrontations of the decade. As the United States intensifies pressure on Nicolás Maduro, the unexpected arrival of Mossad reshapes the entire strategic landscape. Israel's intelligence service brings decades of clandestine expertise, surveillance infiltration, and target neutralization, now applied to a regime already weakened by internal mistrust and regional isolation. Working alongside the CIA, Mossad helps construct an unprecedented intelligence net, exposing escape routes, dismantling protective networks, and amplifying psychological pressure within the Venezuelan military and political elite. This covert campaign reverberates across the hemisphere. It mirrors patterns seen in Ukraine, Israel-Iran tensions, and US-China rivalry, demonstrating how modern conflict increasingly blends technology, intelligence, cooperation, and geopolitical signaling. As fear spreads inside Venezuela, civilians, migrants, and neighboring countries brace for potential fallout. Regional governments adjust policies, strengthen alliances, and prepare for outcomes ranging from peaceful transition to destabilizing collapse. Ultimately, the crisis becomes more than a battle over one authoritarian leader. It is a defining test of America's influence, the durability of democratic norms, and the future balance of power in Latin America. The hemisphere now stands at a pivotal moment, watching, waiting, and confronting a question with global consequences.